Okay, everyone, so the last talk of this session is from Dustin Carlino, who's going to hopefully tell us how did the map across the road?
Yeah, we're not going to answer why. That's way too philosophical. So hi, I'm happy to return to state of the map. Lot to get through, so I'll just kind of jump in. I've been working with OpenStreetMap data sort of in a transportation planning context since about 2018, and almost everything I've done is open source on GitHub. If you might have heard of AB Street, some work that I started a couple of years ago, or kind of back in 2018, sort of a traffic simulator based on OpenStreetMap. But sort of since that project, I've done a bunch of other things that I won't have time to talk about. But if you're interested, you should check out my website. Um, but actually, I kind of lied when I said 2018 was when I started. So in 2010, I was a freshman at a university, and way before I knew about OSM, I, for a project, decided to make a map of the campus from scratch. And sort of in blue, if you can see, like mark the entrances to all the buildings. And yeah, there's a story I don't really have time to tell about why this happened, but you could like copy paste your class schedule into it, and it would tell you how to cut through the buildings. Because the summer in Texas was very humid, or like it might be raining, and just yeah, you might want to spend time in the air conditioning. So this was like very simple pedestrian routing based on that. And then of course, right after I do this project, I discover OpenStreetMap, and it's like I didn't have to pretend to know how to survey buildings. But yeah, I guess besides that, I've also been interested in sort of micro scale hand-drawn maps. I used to practice a lot of parkour on the University of Washington campus in Seattle, and these are two maps I drew spaces there, and the one on the left, if you can see, I like made up a notation to represent movements through that space. But yeah, that's a talk for another time. This talk is about walking and how to understand that through the data in OSM. Because I'm an American who've been living here for about 4 years, I'm going to confusingly use sidewalk and pavement and just get confused between the two. They mean the same thing for this talk. And if I say severance and forget to define it, that's just like a road that's very difficult to cross, and we'll kind of get into that a bit more. So yeah, first let's talk about the OpenStreetMap data model for sidewalks. The kind of older style is you have a way representing a road, and you say sidewalk equals left, right, both or none, just as a tag on there. It's nice and simple. Alternatively, you can draw separate sidewalks as their own way, and then you would say something like footway equals sidewalk, and it's just parallel to the main road, and you can express a bunch more detail. The author of Sidewalk Creator, a project kind of similar to something I'll talk about today, has a paper out and has this really incredible diagram, just kind of talking about the two formats. But in reality, you have a mix of these things. If you're looking in a particular place, sometimes it's tagged on the sidewalks are tagged on the road. Sometimes you have separate geometries, and the separate geometries might just like cut off randomly. And so, as a data consumer, if you're doing any kind of pedestrian analysis or routing, it's really tricky to work with it. This mix is, depending on the place that you're looking, quite bad. So. In like Paris and Berlin and other big European centers, mostly separate sidewalks have kind of taken over, and they're very consistently mapped. Around like London and the UK, it's a lot worse. There's a mix where it's mostly just tagged on the street. Yeah, and this is a just like very awkwardly colored representation of what that mix might look like in central London. So the separate sidewalks are shown in black, and around like central London, people have mapped separate sidewalks and kind of on the road indicated that there are separate sidewalks, but then as soon as you move away from that targeted area, it's mostly tagged on the road, or there's a big mix of it. So people always want to know like which way should you use. Already in previous talk, I heard a big argument for just keeping it on the road. I'm not going to tell you. My plea is just be consistent in a particular area. Don't halfway convert to one style and just like have no plan for kind of finishing it up. And this talk is sort of as a data consumer, how do you deal with the mix of it? But if you do want somebody in your life telling you the right way to map, go read the pedestrian working groups wiki, because they have defined sort of the right way in a lot of detail. And yeah, you can read about that. So next, I'm going to instead tell you not about how to map sidewalks, but about how to use the data in a way that I think makes good sense. But sort of a disclaimer is that when I'm talking about routing here, I mean for people able-bodied and not wheelchair use, and so I'm not talking about curb ramps and raised crossings and things like that. I'd like to, it's just much harder, and the data models, the amount of data is far, it's just kind of impossible to do right now. So if you've been on the mailing list, you've seen complaints like this, where somebody uses OSRM and says, give me a route to cross the street, and then they're a little bit surprised when that route does something a little bit crazy just to cross the street, because the nearest crossing is really far away, or because it has to actually trace around the entire road. And this has sometimes been used as an argument against mapping sidewalks as separate objects, but I think this is instead a problem with the rules of the router, not with the data. And so instead, what I think makes sense, if you're routing for pedestrians who are able to, who don't need a crossing on small roads, the idea is like, if you're on a severance or like a road that is difficult for most people to just cross anywhere, then you have to explicitly use a crossing node, and you can only cross at particular places. But if it's a small residential street or a pedestrianized street, you don't need crossings mapped. And you effectively can use the center line of the road. And I think this mix gives you something that matches a lot more like realistic behavior of what people do. Just to talk a little bit about roads, like what are the roads that count as a severance? This is a story for later, but one time in the middle of the night, I walked from Mountain View to the San Jose airport over in the US. And this is like I don't know, it took like 10 or 11 hours or something. And like there were roads that looked even worse than this, where there's no sense of people should be walking anywhere near there. And because it was the middle of the night, I was able to sort of sprint across and be sure that a truck was not about to fly around the corner. But like, yeah, the roads like this definitely could use a crossing if more people were trying to walk there. I've also had the pleasure of traveling a bunch of places. A couple of years ago, I was in Hong Kong on crutches. And a lot of times I would wind up staring across the street at this like beautiful park, wanting to go there, and just like, I can see it, it's just, 30 seconds away in a straight line. But the road is completely impossible to cross, and the nearest crossing might be like an overpass with a lot of stairs, and it might be like a 2 or 3 minute walk away, which kind of inspired a lot of this work and understanding the impact of severances. But so how do we like first decide what roads are the ones that are hard to cross? It's really, really tempting to use just the highway classification. A lot of times highway equals primary means it's a big road, it's hard to cross. But immediately I found a counterexample in London and Bermondsey, where it is technically classified as a primary road. In practice, the speed limit is low, although that doesn't really tell you too much. But the traffic volume is low, and like kind of in practice, pedestrians rule the street. And if you go there, there's no crossings. You don't see people only crossing at the crossings. People are crossing everywhere. And so yeah, highway classification is definitely not enough. And it's actually quite difficult because like past couple of days I've been in Edinburgh, and just like watching how people cross there, and how often do people cross against a signal versus in London is just completely different. Like in London, it doesn't matter if a light's red, or it doesn't matter if there's no crossing of any sort. On a lot of roads, people will just sort of cross everywhere because enough people do this, drivers are sort of used to it, and there's a lot of like things that aren't quite mapped, like bits of cement kind of acting as an effective traffic island, or like a median that you can sort of use. I think it also has to do a lot with like sight lines, and like if there are a bunch of traffic signals around, even without crossings, but if the timing of the traffic signals is such that you can like clearly see that cars are stopped both directions, a lot of people will cross. But to kind of simplify some of this issue, just like in short, if you have to think about it to cross a street, and you can't just sort of do it anywhere, then let's say it's a severance. Gonna skip that. But yeah, so with this routing model, it's extremely sensitive to both the definition of a severance and any missing data. So here are 2 routes through Sheffield, and you would expect to, like the nicer looking one is the purple one on the bottom, because it goes through the center. But in fact, if we do this strict thing of like only crossing the severances at crossings, we are forced to do the blue one at the top, which looks really bad because it unnecessarily goes through that roundabout and it kind of avoids the center. Why is that? It's because at the very beginning we have to cross a B road. Like maybe that B road in practice is not actually that hard to cross, I'm not sure. Or maybe there's an unmapped crossing where the purple line is trying to go. In this case, there was an unmapped crossing. I added it, and then the route gets fixed. But that kind of shows the sensitivity of this approach on mapping everything and being able to validate it. So despite the like mix of sidewalk styles and OSM, how can you implement that routing model if that is what you decide is sort of useful. So to kind of implement this at like a algorithmic pathfinding level, there's some rules. I'll just kind of talk about this through pictures because it's a little bit easier. So the thick line in the middle is let's say that's a main road. The thin parallel lines, the thin vertical lines are small streets that we're allowed to cross anywhere. And then if the colors are showing up, the thinner blue lines are sidewalks, which in this case are mapped along the whole main road and on one of the smaller roads. And we have one crossing as a circle. So it's important that if we are on the small road and you want to just like continue north-south, at this point you can't cross the big road because you're only allowed to cross at a crossing. And so we need to remove that as a connection, and we have to use that explicit crossing there. And so if we kind of redraw this to take away the lines that we're not allowed to cross, it looks a little bit more like this, where yeah, like now you can sort of trace along the lines as you would expect. And so just to illustrate that, if we wanted to do that north-south route all the way to the left, we have to detour over and use that explicit crossing because we're going over a big road. And then the other rule is, I said that like for smaller roads, you can cross anywhere. That actually means from the routing engine perspective, you don't care about separate sidewalks. You could use them if they're there, but you're also allowed to use the middle of the road, and you can just kind of clean up the results when you display the directions. I think this produces results that look meaningful. So this is a valid route, and this is also a valid route. We could use the sidewalk or not for that last little bit. And so if this is the routing model that we want to do, the first instinct is like, okay, the data is messy and missing. Maybe we can just completely ignore separate sidewalks and just try to use the road center line and track whether we're on the left or the right side. But that ends up being difficult because if you have a side road that hits the main road, you need to figure out, are you hitting that main road on the left or the right side? And you do need to like rewrite the graph and make sure that you're only allowed to go north from the left side of that road and not the right side. And effectively, you've reinvented separate sidewalks. And so there's really just no avoiding them. And so this routing model requires separate sidewalks along all of the big roads. And of course, they're not there. And so like in an ideal world, before you did some kind of routing or pedestrian accessibility analysis somewhere, you would go fill them in. But in practice, that might not be doable. And so instead, what you can do is just heuristically generate them. And the purpose of like generating the separate sidewalks is not to upload it to OSM and sort of like claim that's real data. It's just for use in this routing engine or this analysis as kind of a temporary measure. There's a project created a couple of years ago called Sidewalk Creator as like a QGIS plugin that sort of pioneered this approach. And today I'm introducing another project called Speedwalk that does something a little bit similar with different aims. So just to illustrate how Speedwalk works, if we start with this road centerline model, kind of everything shown in red, there's no separate sidewalks here. And after generating them, we get the black lines kind of surrounding it. And in this case, only surrounding the two big roads. All of the smaller roads are sort of left alone. Another example, a little bit more complicated, looks like this with sort of a dual carriageway. And after generating it, might be kind of hard to see the black lines, but they more or less reasonably approximate where the separate sidewalks are and ensure like a good connectivity. So the way this process works is 5 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to skim through how this process works. It is technical, and the slides will be published. But yeah, the takeaway here is there's some recommendations if you want to do pedestrian mapping. Basically, get the crossing nodes and focus on big roads as you do sidewalks. There's a tool called Speedwalk that I'm not going to show, but that the information is online and you can check it out. It also does a bunch of things to detect tagging errors involving sidewalks. That yeah, it'll help you clean up errors really quickly. Then the last bit of this talk is like applications of this that are sort of interesting to do. So there are some that are focused on how difficult is it to cross the street. And if you just do something simple like map the distance between adjacent crossings, the darker areas are places where it's difficult to cross, and that tells you kind of interesting patterns. And so like in London, it's quite easy to cross the street everywhere until you go to South London, and then actually the distances get kind of huge. Kind of gloss over that. There's also this idea of like isochrones or walk sheds. If you start at the point in the middle, how far can you walk in about 15 minutes? If we're using crossings, you'll get cut off in a lot of places where it's difficult to cross. Whereas if you go everywhere, it kind of is a full bubble around that point, as you'd expect. And sort of highlighting this difference, this is from an urban planning perspective saying like, if you make it easier to cross the road along those severances, you effectively increase the ability for people to like reach a train station or reach a school in 15 minutes and things like that. And again, sensitivity to the data. If there's no crossings at all, you sort of get stuck, and this is just like a data quality problem. If you happen to have something like travel demand data showing like trips from home to work, then you can calculate the route that people are likely to take, and then discover things like streets that probably have a lot of pedestrian traffic, and also the crossings that are in use a lot, or the crossings that are missing. This has some applications for figuring out safe routes to school if you had information about where school children live, and this is something that's kind of an ongoing project. I'm going to skip past some of this stuff, and instead I've been very kind of negative about walking around as a pedestrian, like, oh, we have to only use crossings, it's difficult to deal with main roads, but let's be a little bit more fun and like take point of interest data. So like there's lots of restaurants and cafes and things like that in London. This particular tool lets you like filter it by amenity type extremely specifically. So for example, we could take out fast food in pubs and like get rid of anything that's a chain and just do like local stores and just sort of like filter points of interest, have some sense of like places that are interesting to me personally. And then if we plan a route from A to B, we kind of have a few different choices of a walking route. Some of them are just going to be the red line is the fastest one. If we're willing to go like I don't know, 1.5 kilometers longer than that, then we'll cut through the parks, but then we won't pass by many places at all. Like the direct route passes by 50 of these places that are interesting. The quiet route passes by 8. But if we do this kind of wiggly blue line in the middle, it's only a little bit longer than the quiet route, and we pass by 154 places that I've marked as interesting to me. So this is a great way to, just like create more fun walks. So for example, if you're walking from King's Cross to Tower Bridge, maybe you have a friend in town and you're just trying to get them really drunk. The 3 routes in this case are actually really similar, but if you make a point of passing by the pubs, you can pass by 15 instead of 1 or instead of 5. And so like here's your pub crawl tool, something like that. And just another example in London where like the blue path is like maybe a little bit wiggly, but you pass by like so many places that could be relevant to you. So yeah, sorry to blaze through this talk. These are the links to all of these tools. Please use them. Please email me.
Hi, Dustin. Martin from Cycle Streets. I broadly agree with your approach of kind of segmenting main roads and local streets and using the different approach to them. I still feel there's lots of ambiguity, though, as to exactly what a main road is there, particularly in the UK context. I mean, you gave the example from San Jose or whatever, it was six lanes, but that's not generally what you see in most towns and cities, for a lot of even B roads. I mean, I can think of several B roads near where I live where you can actually get across the road quite easily. I also just wondered, you mentioned about the problem of with the silly example where people were sort of routed in a stupid way, and you're saying that's kind of the fault of the router. Are you implying, though, that would need some sort of area-based junction concept where you're kind of surrounding a junction with an area and using that to sort of auto-assume a crossing over a gap that actually physically isn't written into OSA?
Thank you. Both really good questions. So for the second question, no, it's simpler than that. I think the routing engine should say if the road is classified as very small and low traffic, like in that case, it's probably highway equals residential, then allow using the center line, like either using separate sidewalks or the center line, because then you capture the ability to cross the street anywhere. The first question of like how do we actually define those roads that are big and difficult to cross? This is hard. And yeah, I had an example in Bermondsey where it's highway primary, but in fact, like pedestrians rule, and other examples where it might be like highway tertiary and it's like difficult to cross. I don't have a good approach here. If there was like robust data about like traffic volumes or speed, that'd be a way to do it. But yeah, it is like in these tools, it's meant to be, you can sort of redefine it based on local context if you have that information. Thank you.
That was really interesting, because while you're talking about London, like I was working around Soho and people have been mapping the pavements, but then I noticed sometimes there's those little quiet bits that come off the pavements that pass between buildings, but they're connected with a road. So then I thought I'll clip them because then they don't actually connect technically with a road, but then that introduces weird routing issues. And then obviously you can do things like footway like links. So I was trying to represent what I saw on the ground, but obviously the people say don't target the router. And that's kind of what you're saying. But obviously we have lots of routers that would not handle that. So how do, I guess, short of everyone updating, what would you propose?
That one's hard. So yeah, like the problem is you have a footway link that connects to a separate sidewalk somewhere, and like that's the thing that ensures routing. So I'm not saying these routing engines should stop using separate sidewalks next to small streets. I'm saying like allow either the separate, like basically always allow a footway equals sidewalk in your routing engine, and allow a road center line if it is a small street for some definition of small street. And then I think you kind of maintain the connectivity everywhere, and that's like a relatively easy thing for routers to do. But yeah, that situation is sort of tricky.
Okay, so I have another question about the pavement mapping. So in the place where we have a separate sidewalk, so we have some use cases of like when you have a bicycle, you get off the train at a train station platform, so you push the bike out of the train station, and the exit connects to the sidewalk, and then it is physically possible to push the bike from the sidewalk to the central line to start cycling, but of course it's not a crossing, and of course it's not connected to the map between the sidewalk and the central line at that point because it's not a crossing. So is it possible to solve this problem other than walking the bike on the sidewalk as shown on the router?
Yeah, it's tough. Like the problem is, like you can make a router that moves like a robot and like follows rules specifically, and so something like if the road is classified as difficult to cross at any point, don't allow it. But then like in practice, a lot of people will just like there is space, there is low traffic enough for people to just like cross a road anywhere, and they're gonna like ignore the directions from that router. I mean, I think it'd be really cool to have a router that lets you sort of tune and say just like actually like up to a grade of road, I'll cross it anywhere. If the traffic is low enough. But yeah, I think it's hard to solve that in every case automatically. I don't have ideas there.
I know in France we have some rules about the pedestrian can cross the street, but if you are closer than, I don't remember if it's 50 meters or something like that, and if there is a crossing, you have to use it. It's something because you have the possibility to cross technically, etc. But then you have the legality about it. Have you thought about that? Is it something you have in mind? Because there may be some rule that say if there is a close crossing, you have to use it. And
right, yeah, I've heard about laws like that. If you're like within X hundred meters of a signalized crossing or a zebra crossing, legally you have to use it. Otherwise, you can kind of cross anywhere, and the driver is supposed to yield. The approach that I described doesn't handle that, but I think that kind of rule could be codified basically by a pre-processing step of saying like anytime you have an appropriate crossing, look 100 meters left and right, and then insert like a virtual like allowable crossing, or actually like mark that entire segment of road that's like further away than that amount as like can cross anywhere, and then incorporate it in the engine. But yeah, I haven't designed it to sort of handle that case yet.
To deal with your Bermondsey exception, do you just want a crossability tag to say this is a road which would otherwise, any sensible router would go, I don't know about that, but actually it's fine. Do you want to go that way?
Yes, but like that's really subjective, and yeah. So the answer is yes, but I don't know how to define it. I was like struggling to come up with this definition anyway. So
I've got a question. I've quite often found that like railway platforms aren't routable in journey planners. Is that something that probably should be kind of routable, so then you can actually...
Good question. I guess that also comes down to like a little bit of indoor mapping. I'm less familiar with how these look. I guess like if everything is sort of connected
they're
connected.
Yeah, they're connected by station with footpaths outside, but it's the platform itself is quite often mapped as an area or a line, but it's railway equals platform rather than kind of a footway. A bridge usually is a footway.
I mean, yeah, like I guess to make this work in a router, there'd have to be a pre-processing step to just like snap it to the nearest routable footway thing, but that's also not something that I've looked into yet, and could be a hard problem if there's like multiple entrances to a railway, or like you have to go through a barrier to do some of them.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the great presentation. I just would like to check, you brought up this pedestrian working group tire approach for mapping the pedestrian map data, but I guess it's only aligned for the OSM US, not necessarily for across the entire like OSM community. So I wonder, like, is there any alignment in the UK after like having bunch of long OSM forum thread on this, how to map, you know, sidewalk either as a, you know, attribute on the tag, road geometry, as well as separate. So I wonder, like, is there any like working group in the OSM UK, or is there any interest where we can start this discussion? I'm very interested in this.
I'm not aware of anybody like trying to organize these discussions, but also I guess like as somebody who writes software that works on OSM data theoretically anywhere, I would be quite unhappy if like people in the US decide to all do things one way and then like elsewhere is sort of a mix of styles. I think like people need to ultimately like consolidate on the same style, or like be consistent within a place. And also like the sort of pedestrian working group US style is like has very high penetrance in some European cities. Like Paris has separate sidewalks mapped extremely consistently. Like they have chosen to do that. I agree. Somebody should organize that. I don't know if I have the time or like leadership skills, but if that existed, I would 100% weigh in on it. Okay.
At least we should make sure that the same tag means the same thing everywhere. Maybe the local practice to map with separate sidewalk or not, or to join, could be different. But I think the meaning of the tags should be the same everywhere. What about having a severance tag? Instead of inferring that, oh, this looks like a way which is a severance.
Yeah, that's kind of the same proposal as like this is a crossable way. The problem is I think that just like becomes way too. It's the inverse of it. Yeah. I mean, I think it becomes very subjective, and it's like not on the ground verifiable. And so instead, so far my approach has been like people using this urban planning software have local context in that place and kind of have a sense of the traffic volumes. And so somebody can look at the default definition and then say, just like quickly select the road and say, this one no, this one yes. And that's about the best you can do. But if you have a router working anywhere, it's kind of harder. Like I don't have an answer for that yet.
Okay, everyone. I think we better bring this to a close, but it's great to see this has inspired so much discussion. So thanks again. In this session.